My father shrugged. Families make sacrifices. When he insisted I borrow against my home to fund my brother's lavish wedding, I met his gaze and said, "You can call me selfish, but I won't risk my future for his fantasy." The problem was not that my brother wanted an expensive wedding. The problem was that my father had already decided my house was the solution. He acted like it was the most normal thing in the world, like I was supposed to look at the equity I had spent years building and just hand it over because my younger brother wanted a bigger party than he could afford. I was 37 then. I owned a small house in Grove City, just outside Columbus. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a driveway that cracked every winter, and a backyard I had spent 2 summers fixing up because I was tired of renting and wanted something that felt mine. I had bought it after my divorce. That part mattered more than I wanted to admit. The house was the first thing in my adult life that felt stable. My ex-wife had taken most of the furniture and half the savings. I had taken the dog, a mortgage, and a promise to myself that I would never again let anybody treat my finances like a community chest. For a while, that promise had been easy to keep. Then my brother Tyler got engaged. Tyler was the kind of younger brother who had never met a soft landing he did not think was his due. He was charming when he needed to be, careless when he could get away with it, and always managed to sound like bad luck had hunted him down personally. If he missed rent, it was because his hours got cut. If he ran up a credit card, it was because life was expensive. If he needed help, he called my dad, and my dad always helped, not me. I learned early that I was the one expected to be steady, not the one expected to be rescued. I was the son who got told to work hard, be responsible, and stop complaining. Tyler was the son who got told not to worry, things would work out. I used to think that was just family weirdness. Then I got old enough to see the pattern. When I was in my 20s, I covered Tyler's truck repair after he blew a transmission and somehow forgot to mention it until the tow yard called. I paid a utility bill for him one winter because my dad said he was embarrassed and I should not make a big deal out of it. I covered the deposit on an apartment Tyler did not keep because he decided to move in with a girlfriend 2 weeks after signing the lease. Every time it came back around the same way. I was told I was being a good brother. I was told family looked out for each other. I was told not to keep score. Meanwhile, Tyler never had to keep score because somebody else always did it for him. I stopped doing most of that once I got divorced and had to rebuild my own life. That was when I bought the house. That was when I started keeping a real budget. That was when I learned what a fixed-rate mortgage felt like and why a 6-month emergency fund mattered more than a fancy car or a giant vacation. That house was not just property to me. It was proof that I had clawed my way back from a life that almost wrecked me. So when my father first brought up Tyler's wedding, I honestly thought he meant a small contribution. Maybe helping with catering. Maybe tossing in some money for a suit rental or a reception hall deposit. I was already mentally preparing a polite no when he mentioned the venue. Then the photographer. Then the band. Then the destination honeymoon Tyler and his fiancée Megan were suddenly talking about like it was a birthright. By the time he said the words "families make sacrifices," I already knew this was not a normal ask. It was a demand with better manners. The first time it came up was at my mom's house on a Sunday in April. My mom lived in Hilliard and still had the kind of kitchen where everything smelled like coffee and old casserole dishes. Tyler and Megan were there, so was my dad. They had spread wedding magazines across the table like they were planning a small corporate merger. I remember Megan showing me pictures of a vineyard venue 2 hours away. White chairs, string lights, a barn that had been renovated so thoroughly it barely looked like a barn anymore. The package price was ridiculous, even before flowers and food and whatever else wedding people managed to turn into a line item. I kept my face neutral. I asked how much they had saved. Tyler laughed like that question was adorable. My dad said it was early and the point was to figure it out together. That was my first warning sign. People do not use the phrase "figure it out together" unless they already expect you to help carry the burden. I did not agree to anything that day. I gave them a few $100 for a gift and said I hoped the planning went well. On the drive home, I told myself I was overthinking it. Then my dad started calling. At first, it was casual. He asked if I had seen the venue photos. He asked if my house was still in good shape. He asked if I had refinanced when rates dipped a few years earlier. That last question made my skin itch. I told him yes. I told him I had a decent rate and that I was not touching it unless I absolutely had to. He said that was smart. Then he said Tyler just needed a little help to get started. A little help turned into a discussion about home equity. Home equity turned into a discussion about me taking out a line against my house. Not co-signing. Not gifting. Actually borrowing against the house I lived in so Tyler could have the wedding he and Megan wanted. I thought he was joking the first time. He was not. He shrugged when I told him no and told me families make sacrifices. That sentence hit me harder than it should have, not because I had never heard it before, because I had. A lot, usually right before somebody explained why I was the one expected to sacrifice. I told him I would not risk my house for party. He said it was not a party. He said it was Tyler's wedding. He said it was a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I told him once-in-a-lifetime things should not require me to gamble my home. That is when his face changed. Not angry exactly. More disappointed than angry. Like I had failed a test I did not know I was taking. He said I was being selfish. He said Tyler had always wanted a real wedding, not something cheap and embarrassing. He said I had equity sitting there doing nothing. That was the first time I realized he did not see my house as my house. He saw it as untapped potential. That night I went home and did what I always do when I feel myself getting cornered. I got quiet. I made coffee. I opened a spreadsheet. I pulled up my mortgage statement. I checked my balance, my interest rate, my monthly payment, and how much room I had after all my real expenses. I wrote down the numbers because numbers do not care about family drama. My mortgage was just under $1,250 a month, including taxes and insurance. My balance was a little over $162,000. The house had gone up in value since I bought it, mostly because everything in Central Ohio had gotten expensive. That did not mean it was free money. It meant I had built a cushion. A cushion I relied on. If I pulled a home equity line, I would be trading my fixed payment for a variable one. If I refinanced cash out, I would be giving up a low rate I could never get again. Without luck, I probably would not see twice in my life. I would also be turning my home into a loan Tyler might never repay. Because I knew Tyler. I knew him the way brothers do. He was great at being enthusiastic in the planning stage and terrible at the boring part where bills show up. So I said no. Then I got the first text from Tyler. It was long. He said Megan had already booked hair and makeup consults. He said the deposit on the venue was due soon. He said Dad thought I would understand once I saw how much planning had gone into it. He said he knew I was good for it. That last line bothered me, not because I was not good for it, because he was talking as if my money already belonged to the family budget. I ignored it overnight. The next morning, my mom called during my commute. She sounded tired before she even said why she was calling. She told me Tyler was stressed. She told me my dad thought I had overreacted. She told me this was just how families helped each other. I asked her if she knew they wanted me to borrow against my house. She went quiet. That silence told me everything. She knew. Maybe not every detail, but enough. I asked if she thought that was reasonable. She said she thought nobody wanted to start their marriage with debt. I told her borrowing against my home was debt. She said yes, but it would be debt with a purpose. I almost laughed at that. That was the kind of sentence people say when they are trying very hard not to admit the obvious. I told her I was not going to do it. She sounded disappointed, but not shocked. That was another warning sign. If somebody does not act surprised by your refusal, they probably expected your compliance. I spent the rest of the week trying to get back to normal. I went to work. I inspected bids. I argued with a supplier over a backordered roof membrane. I stopped at Major on the way home and bought chicken, laundry detergent, and the wrong kind of salsa because I was half distracted. I walked my dog, Chester, around the block and pretended my family was not trying to use my house as a wedding fund. Then Friday night, Tyler called again. He wanted to meet, not a phone call, a real meeting. He said Dad had something to show me. I should have said no immediately. Instead, I said fine because part of me still believed this could be resolved by adults acting like adults. That was my mistake. We met at a restaurant near my dad's side of town, one of those places with exposed brick walls and photos of famous baseball players nobody under 50 really cared about. Tyler was already there with Megan when I walked in. My dad was at the table too. There was a paper folder in front of him. That should have been my cue to leave. It was too organized, too prepared. They had brought a prop to a conversation I thought was still open. I sat down anyway. My dad did most of the talking. He said Tyler and Megan had found a venue they loved. He said they wanted a real reception, not a backyard compromise. He said my mom had offered some help, but not enough. He said the gap was too big to cover with small contributions and that I had the best financial footing in the family. That phrase landed like a hand on my shoulder. Best financial footing in the family. That was his way of saying I was expected to absorb the problem. I asked how much they needed. My dad slid the folder toward me. Inside were printouts, venue estimate, catering proposal, photography package, a live band, a floral budget that made no sense to me at all. By the time I added everything in my head, it was already north of $60,000, maybe closer to 70 if you included the extra things they had left out. I asked what they had saved. Tyler said around $12,000. Megan said she might get another $5,000 from her parents. My dad said the point was to bridge the gap without making it feel like a cheap wedding. That was when I finally understood how they had framed this in their heads. They were not asking me to save a wedding. They were asking me to preserve a fantasy, I asked why Tyler and Megan were planning a wedding they could not afford. Tyler looked offended. Megan looked wounded. My dad looked patient, which annoyed me almost as much. He explained, in the tone people use for children and difficult relatives, that weddings mattered because they set the tone. He said you only got one chance to do it right. He said if Tyler started out by settling, he would always regret it. I remember staring at the tabletop and realizing the logic was not actually about marriage. It was about appearances. They wanted the kind of wedding they could show people. They wanted family and friends to see a grand event and assume everything in their lives was easy and elegant and under control. My house was about to be used to pay for that impression. I asked point blank if they expected me to refinance. My dad did not even try to dodge it. He said yes. He said I could take out a home equity loan or refinance for a larger amount, and then Tyler would pay me back over time. I asked what over time meant. He shrugged. That shrug is the one thing I still remember most clearly. It was so casual, so sure. It said he had already mentally spent the money. It said my willingness was a detail, not a requirement. I asked what would happen if Tyler did not repay it. My dad said that was a negative way to frame family trust. Tyler chimed in and said he would never do that to me. Megan looked embarrassed, but not enough to stop the conversation. I asked if the loan would be in my name only. My dad said that was easier. I asked if they understood that if I borrowed against my home, I would be paying interest on somebody else's wedding. Tyler said it would not be like that. He said it would just be temporary. That word was doing a lot of work. Temporary is what people say when they want you to stop thinking about risk. I asked what the payment plan was. Nobody had one. I asked what collateral Tyler was offering. He laughed like I had made a joke. I asked whether he had already looked into cheaper venues. Megan said she did not want to have to compromise on the most important day of her life. That phrase annoyed me so much I had to set my fork down. I asked whether my home counted as a compromise for them. Nobody answered that one. Instead, my dad went back to family sacrifices. He said I was the one with a stable job. He said I had built equity and should be proud enough to share it. He said Tyler was younger and had less time to get established. I asked how any of that made my house his solution. He said because I was his brother. That was the point where I knew the conversation was over. Not because I had won, because they had already decided they were right. I told them no, just no, no loan, no refinance, no borrowing against my home. I said I would give a wedding gift like any other guest, but I was not going to put my future on the line for a single day. My dad stared at me long enough that I could feel Megan getting uncomfortable beside Tyler. Then he said I was being cold. Tyler said I was acting like he had asked for a kidney. I told him I was only being asked to gamble my house, which seemed like a fair point to me. My dad said I was making a bigger deal out of this than I needed to. I told him I was making exactly the right size deal out of it. He told me families make sacrifices again, like repeating it would somehow change the math. I remember being weirdly calm, not because I was unaffected, because something in me had finally clicked into place. They were not going to persuade me by making their case stronger. They were going to wear me down until I stopped looking at the consequences. That was not going to happen, so I kept my voice level and said I would not do it. My dad looked at me like he could not believe I was refusing him in public. Tyler looked angry in a hurt way, which is always the hardest version to see. Megan looked trapped, like she had wandered into a fight she had assumed somebody else would solve. I finished my water, stood up, and told them I hoped they found a way to have the wedding they wanted. Then I left. I sat in my truck for almost 10 minutes before turning the key. My hands were shaking a little, not enough that I could not drive, enough that I knew how much pressure I had just been under. The next few days were ugly. Tyler texted me long paragraphs about disappointment and family loyalty. My dad called twice and left voicemails that alternated between calm and offended. My mom tried to mediate. She told me they were all stressed and I should not take it so personally. That was the part that got to me. I was not taking it personally. They were making it personal by trying to reach into my house and pull money out of it. I told her I loved Tyler, but I was not taking on debt for a wedding. She said I did not understand how important it was to him. I said I understood exactly how important it was to him. It was important enough that my home had become part of the plan before anybody bothered to ask me. I could have stopped there. I should have stopped there. Instead, I started thinking like a suspicious person, which was not my natural state but had become necessary. I pulled out my own papers, mortgage, insurance, tax records. I started checking the numbers again, not because I had forgotten them, but because I wanted to make sure I was not overreacting. I talked to my credit union about what a home equity line would actually do to my monthly payment. The woman on the phone was polite and practical. She walked me through the current rates, the closing costs, the draw period, and the variable interest risk. When she said the payment could swing with the market, I felt my stomach drop. If I took that line and rates went up, I would be paying more for years just because Tyler wanted a certain centerpiece arrangement and a band with a horn section. That sounded insane when I said it out loud. I also asked what would happen if I lost my job or had a major repair. The answer was obvious. I would be stuck. That was enough for me. I started keeping records after that, screenshots of the texts, voicemails saved to a folder, an email thread with my dad where he still tried to soften the ask by calling it a temporary family bridge. I printed the original wedding budget and went through it line by line. The venue alone was almost $18,000. Catering was another $14,000. The band was $6,000. Flowers were more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. There was a separate line for a private shuttle between the hotel and venue. There was a line for late-night snacks. There was a line for upgraded bar service because apparently beer and wine were not enough. Every time I looked at it, I found another thing that had been decided for my benefit without my consent. I told myself I was only documenting this because I needed to understand it. The truth was, I already understood it. I just did not want to admit how far they had gone. The next real clue came the following week. I got an alert from my credit monitoring service. A hard inquiry had hit my report from a mortgage lender I had never heard of. Not a soft check, a real inquiry. I froze. I opened the report twice to make sure I was reading it right. Then I called the lender number listed next to the inquiry. It took a little time to get through to a human being. When I did, I explained that I had never applied for anything with them. The woman on the phone was careful and professional. She said the application had not been completed. She said somebody had started a home equity pre-qualification using my address and some basic personal information. She said they could not go any further because the verification was incomplete. I asked what information had been used. She could not give me everything over the phone, but she told me enough to make my stomach go cold. It had been enough to start the process, not enough to finish it. I asked whether the person had been in a branch office or online. She said online. I asked whether a phone number had been attached. She gave me one. It was my dad's cell number. I sat there in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, staring at the counter. I do not know what expression I had on my face. Probably the same one I wear when I accidentally hit a nail into something load-bearing and realize I am going to have to fix it. I called Tyler next. He did not answer. I left a message saying I had seen the inquiry and wanted to know why my information had been used. He texted back 10 minutes later saying he had no idea what I was talking about and maybe it was a bank mix-up. That answer was so bad I almost appreciated the effort. I texted my dad. He did not respond for 2 hours. When he finally did, he said he had only been exploring options, as if my credit report was a landscape to stroll through. I called the credit bureau and froze my credit that same day. Then I called the mortgage lender for my own house and asked them to note that no one besides me was authorized to discuss my account. I also asked for written confirmation that no applications had been made in my name through their system. They sent it by email. I saved that too. The whole thing left me feeling less angry than gross. It was one thing to pressure me. It was another to start poking around my financial life without telling me. The bad part was that I still wanted to believe there was a misunderstanding, that maybe my dad had clicked on something through one of those rate comparison websites and Tyler had gotten ahead of himself. But then my mom called. This time she sounded ashamed. She asked if I had really frozen my credit. I said yes. She told me my dad had mentioned the inquiry at dinner like it was a normal step. She had assumed I knew about it. I asked what she meant by that. She hesitated long enough for me to know the answer before she said it. He had already told her I was helping. Not maybe helping. He had told her I was exploring refinance options for Tyler's wedding like the decision had already been made. That was the moment the whole thing shifted for me. It was not just Tyler. It was not even just my dad. They had started spreading the story that I was on board before I had agreed to anything. They had turned my future into a shared expectation and then acted offended when I did not match it. I asked my mom whether anybody else had been told. She said probably the aunts, maybe some cousins. Certainly Megan's parents because they were trying to coordinate around the budget. I hung up and just sat there for a minute. The issue was no longer whether I would pay. The issue was that I had been cast as the guy who was supposed to pay. That is a hard thing to walk back once people hear it enough times. I spent that night building a spreadsheet that would have made my high school math teacher proud. I listed every expense in the wedding budget. I listed every payment Tyler and Megan had already made. I listed the amount of cash they had on hand. I listed the approximate monthly payment I would face if I borrowed what they needed. I also listed the cost of not doing it. That sounded harsh, but it mattered. My house would be exposed to risk. My savings would get thinner. My emergency cushion would shrink. My ability to handle an HVAC replacement, a roof repair, a job loss, or a medical bill would get weaker. All for a wedding. When I finished, I printed it. I know that sounds dramatic. It was not. I print important things when I need to be sure they exist in the real world. Paper makes it harder to gaslight yourself. The next Sunday, my dad asked me to come by his house. He said he wanted to talk in person and clear the air. I should have declined. Instead, I went because I still hoped he might say something that made this less ugly. He had Tyler there already, along with Megan, and that told me immediately what kind of talk this was going to be. My dad had turned the conversation into a family council. He had also printed something. So had Tyler. There were folders on the table. I sat down without touching any of them. My dad started by saying he was disappointed that I had handled the situation so coldly. He said he understood my concerns. He said Tyler and Megan had trimmed some things already. He said the lender had found a way to make the loan more manageable if I would just agree to be the primary borrower. Primary borrower. That phrase was new. I asked how much they had in mind. My dad said around $45,000. Tyler corrected him and said closer to $50,000 if they wanted to keep the venue. I actually laughed a little then because it was so much money to say so casually. I asked who was going to make the payments. Tyler said he would. I asked what source of income he was planning to use. He said his salary and side work. I asked what happened if he missed a payment. My dad said I was being negative again. I said I was being realistic. Then I took out my own folder. That got their attention. Inside was the email from my lender about the denied inquiry, the hard pull notice, my mortgage statement, the rate lock agreement showing how good my current terms were, a one-page summary of what the monthly payment would look like if I refinanced. I slid it across the table and let them read it. Nobody liked the part where my payment would jump by several $100s, plus fees, plus closing costs, plus the risk of a variable rate if we went home equity instead of cash-out refinancing. I asked whether they really thought a wedding was worth turning my fixed housing cost into a gamble. My dad said it would be temporary. I pointed to the math and asked how temporary looked on paper when interest rates moved. He did not answer. I asked whether they had looked at cheaper venues. Megan said again that the wedding should feel like something special. I told her it would still be special if the food cost less, and the flowers were not imported from somewhere that sounded suspiciously expensive. Tyler snapped that I was making them sound shallow. I told him I was responding to the budget he helped create. Then I said the part I had been saving. I said I had found out someone had started a loan pre-qualification using my information and my father's phone number. That got very quiet very fast. My dad looked at Tyler. Tyler looked at the table. Megan looked confused, which told me she had not known that part. I said I was not accusing anybody of fraud yet, but I was absolutely not signing anything until I understood exactly who had used my information and why. My dad tried to pivot. He said he had only wanted to know what options existed. I asked why those options had been explored with my name and not in a conversation where I was included before the fact. He said because he assumed I would help. That was the cleanest admission he made the whole day. He assumed, not asked, not proposed, assumed. I told him that was the problem. I told him he had built a plan around my home without my consent and then acted offended when I treated that as a boundary instead of a small misunderstanding. He told me I was embarrassing Tyler. Tyler said I was making him look cheap in front of Megan's family. I asked why that was my responsibility. Nobody answered, so I went on. I said I had paid for enough of Tyler's messes over the years to recognize a pattern. I said I had helped when I could and said no when I could not. I said I was not ashamed of having built a life that needed protecting. I said I was not borrowing against my home so somebody else could have a nicer centerpieces and a band they could not afford. Megan flushed red when I said that. My dad stood up halfway, then sat back down because I think he realized getting dramatic would make him look worse. He tried one more time. He said family was supposed to help each other. I told him help was not the same thing as self-destruction. That line landed harder than I expected. Tyler stared at me like I had betrayed him in a way he could not quite explain. I did not yell. I did not name-call. I did not call him spoiled or entitled, even though both words would have fit. I just told them no again. Then I stood up, gathered my folder, and said if anybody used my name or my information on another financial application, I would treat it as a serious issue. That got the room even quieter. I left with my pulse hammering in my ears. I was angry after that, not out of control angry, just a steady low anger that made every family text feel heavier. My dad sent a long message saying I had humiliated him. Tyler sent one saying he had never thought I would be the kind of brother who lets money come before family. Megan did not text me at all, which honestly I respected. My mom called me crying and said everybody was fighting. I asked her whether anybody was fighting about the fact that my house had been put on the table without my permission. She went quiet again. That was becoming a theme. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned things in pieces. My cousin Erin called me to ask if I was really backing out. I told her I had never agreed to begin with. She sounded surprised. She said everybody thought I was handling the financing. That made me want to put my head through a wall. I asked who had told her that. She said my dad had mentioned it at Easter. That was before the wedding budget meeting, before the hard inquiry, before anybody had asked me directly. I called my Aunt Cheryl next. She admitted she had heard the same thing. She also admitted that Tyler and Megan had already booked more than half the vendors, assuming the financing would come through. That was the first time I felt something like a pit open up under my feet. Not because I had been tricked into paying, because they had made commitments based on money that was never theirs. No wonder they were desperate. No wonder every conversation with me had felt like they were trying to push me toward a door that was already closed. I had been the missing piece in a plan they had started building without me. That changed the shape of everything. It meant their urgency was partly self-inflicted. It meant the wedding was not just expensive. It was already over-leveraged. I asked my aunt for Megan's mother's number and got it. I called her later that night, mostly because I wanted to make sure the story had not been distorted into something uglier than it already was. She was polite, guarded, and clearly not thrilled to be dealing with any of it. She told me she thought the wedding was being financed as a group effort. I told her I had been asked to take out debt against my home, not to contribute cash. She paused so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said she would speak to Megan. I do not think she had known the degree of it either. That was important to me. I was mad at my family, but I did not want to punish people who had been misled alongside me. A week later, I got an email from the venue, not because I had signed anything, because Tyler had listed me as the backup contact for billing questions. The planner wanted to confirm the payment arrangement since the larger deposit had not cleared on time. I stared at that email for a full minute before answering. I told them I was not a signatory, not a guarantor, and not responsible for any of the contract charges. I asked them to remove my name and contact information from all wedding records. I also asked them to send me written confirmation that I had no financial obligation. They did. That email mattered more than I expected. It was the first clean piece of paper in the whole mess. My name, removed from somebody else's debt. A simple thing, a powerful thing. The truth came out in layers after that. Tyler had already put part of the honeymoon on a credit card. Megan had ordered a dress that was more expensive than the first one they looked at because she thought the family budget had room. My dad had told several relatives not to worry because I was the stable one and would come through. He had not been trying to scam me in some movie villain way. He genuinely thought he could lean on me because I had always been the one who managed. That almost made me angrier. He was not evil, he was entitled. There is a difference, and sometimes entitlement is harder to deal with because the person carrying it thinks they are being reasonable. The wedding deadline came closer. The venue wanted another payment. The caterer wanted a new deposit. Tyler and Megan started looking at cheaper options in real time. I know that because Tyler finally texted me one night asking if I would at least help with the revised budget. I did not answer right away. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Chester sleeping by my feet and my own bank statement open in front of me. I looked at the numbers and thought about how much damage a few yesies could do. Then I texted him back that I would not borrow against my house, I would not co-sign anything, and I would not discuss financing anymore. I told him I hoped he and Megan found a wedding they could actually afford. He replied with one sentence saying I had become cold. I almost wrote back that cold was what it felt like to have your own family talk about your house like it was community property. Instead, I closed the phone and finished dinner. The odd part is that once I stopped participating, I started seeing just how many people had been quietly waiting to see whether I would cave. A few cousins who had been giving me a hard time suddenly changed their tone. My mom admitted she had been afraid to argue with my dad because he had already told extended family I was helping. My aunt said she thought the wedding was being handled because Tyler had always been lucky with people. That one stung because it was true. Tyler was lucky in the sense that other people got exhausted before he did. The pressure finally shifted when Megan's parents got involved. From what I gathered, they had expected a wedding within a certain budget and did not realize how far Tyler had stretched it. Once they saw the numbers, they refused to keep pretending. That did not make them saints. They still wanted a nice event, but they were not willing to put their own retirement or property on the line for it. That was apparently the line everyone had assumed I would cross. When I did not, the whole structure started wobbling. The venue changed. The guest list shrank. The band got replaced by a DJ. The destination honeymoon became a weekend road trip in Michigan, which Tyler acted like was a tragedy. The fancy bar package disappeared. The flowers got simplified. The wedding was still nice, from what I heard, just not ridiculous. My dad blamed me for all of it. He did not say that in so many words to my face, but he did to other people. A cousin told me he had said I had forced Tyler and Megan to settle. Settle. That word again, as if not ruining my own financial future was some moral failing. The wedding ended up happening in late September at a church hall in Dublin, Ohio, with a reception that looked perfectly fine once everyone stopped comparing it to the fantasy version. I went to the ceremony because I loved my brother, even if I did not love what he had done. I did not offer to pay for anything there. I sat in the back beside my mom and watched Tyler get married while thinking about how much noise had been made over a day that was ultimately still going to happen without my house attached to it. That realization was strangely healing. The world did not end because I said no. My house did not burn down because I refused to refinance. Tyler still got married. Megan still got her dress. My dad still had his son married off. The only thing that really died was the fantasy that my finances were a family resource. After the ceremony, my dad barely spoke to me. He looked at me like I had made him old. Maybe I had, in a way. Maybe I had forced him to see that the son he relied on most was no longer willing to play the role without question. That was painful for him. It was also overdue. Tyler was quieter than I expected. He looked tired, not angry at the wedding, just tired in a way that told me the whole process had worn him down. A week later, he sent me a text asking if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined. Then I went because I was tired of letting everything happen in the middle of family pressure and never saying what I actually thought when the room was calm. He looked embarrassed when we sat down. He said he should have come to me before Dad did. Said he had been so focused on not disappointing Megan that he stopped thinking clearly. He said he really had believed I would help because everybody had made it sound like the family plan was already in motion. That was the closest thing to an apology I was going to get from him, and I took it. Not because it fixed anything, because it was the first honest thing he had said since this started. I told him I was glad he got the wedding he wanted, even if it was smaller. I told him I needed him to understand that my no was not a punishment. It was a boundary. He nodded. He said he understood now. I do not know how much he really understood, but I believed he understood more than my dad did. My dad never gave me the satisfaction of a real apology. He just stopped asking. That might have been the closest thing he could manage. For a while after that, the family was weird. Holiday plans got awkward. Money topics vanished. My mom and a couple of aunts treated me a little more carefully, like they had finally realized I was not some invisible insurance policy. That was nice, but also sad. It meant the whole thing had changed how they saw me. The best part, if I can call it that, was what happened to my house. Nothing. That was the best part. Nothing happened to it. No second mortgage, no line of credit, no variable interest dragging my peace of mind around by the ankle. I kept making my payments. I kept building my savings. I fixed the back fence in October. I replaced the water heater in December without panic because my emergency fund was still there. I even started putting extra money into the mortgage again, something I had paused while all this was going on because I needed the cash cushion more than I needed to shave years off the loan. That felt good. Peaceful even. A year later, Tyler and Megan came over for a cookout in my backyard. It was one of those simple summer evenings where the sun hangs around too long and everybody ends up eating too much potato salad. The vibe was better than I expected. Not perfect. Just better. Tyler was paying off the honeymoon card and a small personal loan his father had taken out in his name when the wedding budget got tight. That part I only learned later. It explained why my dad had been so desperate. He had been trying to avoid admitting that the whole thing had been stacked on debt and assumptions from the start. Megan looked more relaxed than I had ever seen her. Less like somebody selling a dream and more like somebody who had learned what a bill looked like. At some point in the evening, Tyler thanked me again for not letting the family drag me into it. That surprised me. I asked him why. He said because if I had said yes, he would have let it keep growing. He said it was easier to spend somebody else's stability than to face his own limits. That was honest enough that I had to look away for a second. I appreciated it more than he knew, not because I wanted him to feel bad, because I could finally see that he had not been the only person in the family stuck in a bad pattern. He had been trained to expect rescue. My dad had been trained to call that love, and I had been trained to absorb the consequences. Breaking that pattern hurt. It also saved me. I do not talk to my dad as much now. We are not in some big dramatic feud. We just do not have the same relationship we used to have. He still thinks I should have helped more. I still think he should have respected the first no. That gap is probably not going away, but I am okay with that. I would rather have a smaller circle and a secure roof over my head than a family that only likes me when I am underwriting their dreams. People like to say family is everything. I still believe family matters. I just do not believe family gets to take whatever it wants because it calls itself family. That wedding taught me that the hard way. It also taught me something else. The loudest person in the room is not always the one who is right. Sometimes the one who wins is the one who keeps the receipts, stays calm, and lets the facts do the work. My dad wanted me to risk my house for Tyler's fantasy. I did not. And when the numbers finally came out, there was no speech he could give that made my mortgage disappear or my boundary unreasonable. That is why I ended up in the stronger position. Not because I got revenge, because I refused to be bullied into funding somebody else's life while endangering my own. A few months after the cookout, I got a Christmas card from Tyler and Megan. No note about money, no weird guilt trip. Just a picture of them in front of their modest little rental, smiling like people who had survived something and learned a little. I put the card on the fridge, not because I forgot. Because I did not. I kept it there as a reminder that no matter how convincing family sounds when it wants your sacrifice, the truth still matters more than the pressure. My house is still mine. My payments are still on time. My credit is still frozen except when I need it. And the next time somebody in my family starts talking about what I can borrow, I already know exactly what I will say. No.